All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Hello, my name is Greg Dick. I'm a senior engineering team lead at Huddle, headquartered in Lincoln, Nebraska. And here's a map for everybody that is as bad at geography as I am. You see, this is my first time in Toronto, first time in Canada even. And when I found out that I was coming here, I just kind of assumed I was going like straight north, so far north, over the ice wall, but not so much. And it is actually colder in Nebraska than here as well. But I'm very excited to be here today to talk to you all about some things that I have learned over the past few years that have really improved the quality of the one-on-ones that I have with my reports. And if any of you do one-on-ones, my hope is that there's something in here that you can take away from it. Now, as I start to talk through these things, you might pick up on a bit of a theme, which is basically, I used to be bad, but now I'm not. Before I get to the items themselves, though, I got to give some background about myself. The additional context, I think, is important to understanding where I'm coming from with these things. So here's a timeline of myself. I graduated college in 2006 with a degree in electrical engineering. And immediately after college, I had two different jobs, electrical engineering jobs. And I left each of those in about a year. And between those two jobs combined, I think I maybe had one meaningful one-on-one with my boss. It just wasn't a part of the culture at either of those places. In fact, at one of them, my boss was over 1,000 miles away, and any meetings we did have would have just been over the phone. It wasn't a very effective form of managing. So after those two jobs, I went and I got a software job. And I still didn't have regular one-on-ones at this job, but I did have one or two sit-downs a year with my bosses to talk about the things that I did or didn't enjoy about my job. You know, we would talk a little bit about my career aspirations, ways that I wanted to grow as an engineer or as a leader. And I really loved these. It was so much more than anything that I had at the previous jobs. You know, I felt like I was getting some good direction, and it was a good opportunity for me to give feedback to the company. So, you know, to that date, it was the best thing I knew. So that after 6 years there, I came to Huddle. And there was this immediate culture shock in management style, because my new supervisor, he came up to me and he said, "We're going to meet every other week." And my first reaction to that was, whoa, that's pretty often. Are we going to have enough to talk about? You know, 2 weeks isn't a very long time for anything to change. But as it turned out, we didn't have that much to talk about. Now, I didn't work on the same team as my supervisor, so I'd usually give a little bit of an update about my work and how that was going. I do remember he would ask me a lot about if anything was frustrating me, so it was a good opportunity to provide feedback there. Every once in a while, we would talk about career paths, if I saw myself becoming a team lead or a tech lead. We talked about our kids. We both had kids about the same age, and so we would talk about that. We didn't talk a whole lot about goals or progress toward those goals. You know, sometimes these meetings were only 15 to 20 minutes. Sometimes one might get canceled, and I didn't really feel like I was missing anything. But still, I loved these meetings. You know, it was consistent access to my direct supervisor in a one-on-one setting. And it was a good opportunity to ask questions or give feedback about things that I wouldn't have normally felt were worth scheduling a sit-down. So again, to date, best thing I knew. So about a year and a half in at Huddle, I became a manager. And I wasn't given a whole lot of direction other than you need to do one-on-ones with your reports. And now that's not to say that I was like thrown into the deep end of the pool. I had a lot of resources available to me, and I could always lean on the other managers. It's just the way that I performed my one-on-ones was not prescribed to me. So I started out just doing what I knew based on the one-on-ones that I'd already had with my managers up to that point. So my new reports, they were also not actually on my team. So I'd ask a little bit about their work and how that's going. I would ask if there's anything frustrating them. And we would talk a little bit about career paths. It went okay. Not great, but okay. But there's definitely a point where I came to the conclusion that these meetings weren't as useful as they could be. And that's when I started to experiment. So that brings me to my first tool for better one-on-ones. Now this one, I call it the happiness index. Now actually I called it the huddle happiness index, but that doesn't apply to all of you, so today it's just the happiness index. And this one is really simple. I wouldn't be surprised if some of you have done this already. It's a question that I ask in every single one-on-one. On a scale from 1 to 10, how are you feeling about your job? The reason I wanted to ask this is because I didn't feel like I had a good read on how happy or unhappy my reports were. But the interesting thing about this question is that the value that I thought I was going to get is not the value that I actually get from it. It's not the reason I'm here talking to you about it today. You see, when I decided to ask this question, I was thinking, ooh, I'm going to track this number over time. I'm going to look for patterns. I'm going to look for peaks and valleys. Maybe I'll find a good opportunity to tell someone to take a vacation. I thought I was going to go full-on data scientist on this stuff. And I tried, but I just didn't get much out of that. But I didn't stop asking the question because as it turned out, I was having better conversations in my one-on-ones as a direct result of this question. So to understand how that's possible, I got to take a little step back and explain another angle from which I think about this. A long time ago, I saw this piece of advice. It said, figure out what makes you happy and learn how to get more of it. And that really stuck in my head. I don't know why, but I thought about it a lot, especially the first part, figure out what makes you happy. And at first I thought, well, that's dead simple. And I still think it's pretty easy for most people to just start listing off some things that make them happy. You know, for me, it's ice cream, cheesecake, spending time with my family, ping pong. Just out of all the things in my life, what are some of them that make me happy? Now, I think it's a little bit more difficult to do it just in the context of your job, but it's still not that hard. For me, helping others, knocking out a big project, ping pong. But coming up with things like this, it wasn't as useful as I wanted it to be. And there was a point during my last job where I started to get really curious. What are the things in my job that are making me happy or unhappy? So I did a thought experiment. And it was basically just this question. I thought to myself, all right, on a scale from 1 to 10, how am I feeling? And so I picked a number. I don't remember what number I picked, but I picked a number. And then I tried to pinpoint all the things going on in my life that were making me feel like that number. You know, particularly, what aspects of my job were contributing to that number. And so I did this thought experiment many times. And I started to come away with some things that honestly surprised me. You know, it's hard to imagine learning something new about yourself, but it definitely happened for me. One that I can remember, there was this period of time at my last job where I kept getting assigned to put out other people's fires. Not literal fires, that'd be terrifying, but a bug would get into production, it's affecting a client in a big way, and I gotta get it fixed ASAP. And every time I got assigned one of these, I'd have this reaction like, why do I have to do this? But there was this time where I had done a bunch of these, I put out a bunch of fires, and then I happened to do this thought experiment, and I ended up picking a fairly high number. And after some reflection, I started to realize I kind of like putting out the fires. As it turned out, they were never as stressful as I always assumed they would be. It was a little exciting to work on something so urgent and important. And the recognition that I was getting afterward, it felt really good. So I learned other things like this, and I was able to go to my boss and paint a better picture about the type of work that I wanted to do more of, or the stuff that I wanted to avoid. I eventually stopped doing the whole number thing in my head and just kind of constantly kept tabs on the things going on around me and how they made me feel. It's just kind of an element of managing my happiness. From a personal growth perspective, that's been incredibly valuable. So yeah, when I decided to ask this question to my reports, this idea of finding the things that make you happy or unhappy, that was another angle that I was going for. So yeah, I went into a one-on-one and I said, all right, I want you to give me a number from 1 to 10, how you're feeling about your job in the most general sense. And I said, I don't want you to think about it too much. I'm going for like a gut reaction right now. And I also said, 1, it's so bad, you're ready to quit. You might not even have another job lined up, but you're ready to quit. It's that bad. And a 10, it's literally the best thing ever, and you can't even imagine how it can get any better. So they'd give me a number. Maybe it was a 6. So I would write that down in my notes. And if I stopped the experiment right there, I wouldn't have gotten much value. I probably would have concluded that this experiment was not worthwhile. The number by itself just doesn't mean a whole lot. The real value came next when I asked, why a 6? So now they had to think. They had to try to pinpoint all those things going on in their life that made them pick a 6. And it was very easy for me to keep digging in by centering questions around this number 6. What's pulling that number down? What's pushing that number up? What's something that could have happened this past week? Or what's something that you could have done that would cause this number to be higher? And this was all sparking some really great conversation that simply wasn't happening in our previous one-on-ones. So next one-on-one, I'd ask again, first thing in the meeting, what's your number? And this time it'd be different. Maybe it's an 8. And I'd say, ooh, that's higher. What's changed? And maybe they would say something like, well, now I realize that last time my number was a bit lower because we had a lot of uncertainty in our squad's roadmap. And it was kind of stressful. I wasn't sure what I was going to be working on. It was tough to feel productive, and I felt kind of aimless. But this week, we actually had a really productive planning meeting, so we gained a lot of clarity. I know exactly what I'm going to be working on for a while now, and I'm pretty excited about it. I'm looking forward to this project. And when I hear something like that, I light up because there's so much great conversation that can come out of that. Let's talk about the stress around that uncertainty, what you can do about it. Let's talk about some squad conversations that you can drive to gain that clarity a little bit sooner. Let's talk about that aimless feeling, ways you can mitigate it by finding other productive things to do. And let's talk about this project. What excites you about this project, and how can we get you more of that? One of these conversations that's very memorable to me is when a report came in and they gave me their lowest score ever, and they said, I had a really bad NSS shift. So now let me take a quick second to explain what NSS is. At Huddle, we have this tradition of doing non-support support, NSS. And the idea here is that everybody in a non-support role spends a little time each year on the phones taking real customer support calls. Now, there's a lot of really interesting benefits to this that I'm not going to go into, but I'm sure you can imagine that to an introverted engineer, this could be a scary thing. All right, so my report came in, they gave me their lowest score ever and said, I had a really bad NSS shift. Now, them saying I had a bad shift is one thing, but coupling it with this lowest score ever instantly told me that this was a big deal. And that's really powerful. We spent the rest of that one-on-one talking about NSS, dealing with the stress and anxiety around it. We also spent a lot of time talking about the real actual value that it provides. And we didn't stop there. We talked about it several more times after that. I felt pretty good about where we left off in those conversations, and they felt pretty good the next time they went in to NSS. Now, if I hadn't asked for their number, I am sure they still would have said, I had a bad NSS shift. But I'm not sure that I would have recognized how much this affected them. I'm not sure that I would have taken the appropriate amount of time to try to help them out with it. The number became a very effective way for them to tell me, this is a big deal, and we need to talk about it. Now, I've been asking this question for a few years, and I've got some few key takeaways to share. The first one, I noticed this pretty quickly. My reports became more open and candid about things beyond just whatever they were working on. As managers, this is something we always strive for, but it can be a real challenge. I've never had good luck with open-ended questions like, how are you? How are you feeling about things? I think that unless your report is already pretty talkative and willing to open up, it's tough to get there, but this question has helped. Another thing that I've noticed, some people, they actually need a little bit of a nudge to put some thought into this. Unless something big has happened recently, it's pretty easy to just put up a fairly neutral number and say, things are fine. For most people, that's a 7. 7 just feels like a things are fine kind of number. I actually had a report give me a 7 for 4 months in a row, but then they gave me an 8, and I knew something big must have happened. Another team lead at Huddle, he started doing this in his own one-on-ones, and he ran into the same problem, and he decided to change it up, and he actually said, you cannot pick 7. So it was like 7 became the continental divide, and you had to land on one side or the other. And he said that actually did a really great job of forcing people to think about which side of neutral they're on. Another thing I noticed is that for many of my reports, they actually started to think about this stuff consistently throughout the week, not just in our one-on-ones. You know, it wasn't uncommon that I would hear something like, well, 2 days ago, I was like a 5, but now I'm a 7. Or whatever I was last time, I'm like half a point lower than that. And I love hearing details like this because it's so easy to dig into. All right, so what was going on 2 days ago and what's changed since then? Is there one thing in particular that made you drop that half a point? You know, they start quantifying these things for themselves, and it becomes a very efficient form of communication for us. Last takeaway, biggest one, is that it helps me ask the right questions to dig into issues and drive these meaningful conversations. You know, this is an area I didn't think I was particularly bad at before. Certainly, there was room for improvement, but I've definitely gotten a lot better. I want to show this quote. This is a piece of feedback that one of my reports wrote about me this past year. And the reason I want to show it, besides the fact that it makes me look good, the reason I want to show it is because I will tell you this was not true when I first became a manager. I didn't get any feedback like this, not even close. The difference between then and now is the happiness index. So that's number 1. Number 2, another fairly simple one, I call it the accountability item. So this one, I got to start off by describing the problem that I saw, that I was trying to address, which was basically, I'm not great at goal setting, either for myself or for my reports. And a lot of my reports, they're not real great at goal setting either. And to be clear, I don't think it's hard to come up with a goal like, I want to be better at React, or I want to get promoted to senior. But coming up with the concrete, feasible steps to get you there, and then to actually go through with it all, that's hard. It wasn't uncommon that I'd hear things like, or maybe it was even me saying things like, I should read a book to learn about this thing, or I should work on my promotion documents. And then it just never happens. And I think that's for a couple reasons. The first being that, you know, it's easy to think of these things in the context of a one-on-one. But then you leave that meeting and you go back to your normal routine and you just kind of forget about it. The other reason is that in most cases, the only real consequence to not doing this thing you said you should do is slightly delaying your career progression. And it can take a while to feel any pain from that. So I started to think, what can I do about this? The interesting thing here is that I actually tried a few different things before coming to the accountability item. This is like my 3rd iteration of trying to fix this problem that I saw. But eventually I started to think, well, maybe it's a mix of routine and accountability. I thought, what if I just asked them to commit to one little extra thing that they do in between each meeting? So I decided to try it out. So I went into a one-on-one and I said, hey, I want you to come up with one thing that you're essentially promising me that you're going to do before our next one-on-one. I said, I don't care how small it is, it just cannot be something that's already lined up as part of your sprint work. I also said, I will help you to come up with an item, but I will never force one on you. And then I said, I'm going to keep track of whether or not you do this, and at the end of the year, I'm going to give you a report of how many hits and misses you had. That was my attempt at consequence. So we talked about it, and we came up with an item, and I put it down in my notes. And at the next one-on-one, I would ask about it, and we would talk about it, and we'd come up with another one. And in these meetings, I just referred to it as their accountability item. My thought was that if there's always something they know they need to do, it would become routine and less likely to be forgotten. and then committing to that very real timeline of 2 weeks, because my one-on-ones are all biweekly, it would force them to think hard about what can I actually accomplish in this time frame. My hope was that this could become a framework that they could use to break up their larger goals into these manageable chunks. And then they'd have at least a little bit of pressure holding them accountable to get things done. So that was the goal. And how did it turn out? Well, for my reports that needed it the most, it was an absolute game changer. Some of my reports had a really hard time taking any time away from their normal sprint work, even just an hour in between our meetings. But now they were committing to things as accountability items, and they were doing it. They were remembering these things. They were making the time for it. Now, sometimes these happen literally right before our next meeting, but still, they were happening. I also had some reports, they needed a little bit of a nudge to step outside of their comfort zone. But now they were committing to these things as accountability items, and they were doing that. You know, it's easy for me to make suggestions in our one-on-ones, like, hey, this person you don't know very well, you should ask them for some pair programming time. Or hey, this other leader in the company, you should ask them for a sit down so you can volunteer for that responsibility you're interested in. It's easy for me to make these suggestions, and my reports are very receptive to it. They understand the benefits to it. But when these things live outside of their comfort zone, it's also pretty easy to just not do it. But now, they were committing to them as accountability items, and suddenly they're like, ooh, this is the week that I have to do this. And they were. They were stepping outside of their comfort zone, and they were growing because of it. Now, if this all sounds like a silver bullet to goal setting, it's not. There's a very real challenge here, and that's coming up with quality accountability items. I've got a few guidelines that I like to use as we are thinking of these. First and foremost is feasibility. It has to be something that they can actually accomplish in this time frame. So one of the things that I always do is look at the calendar. Are they out anytime in the next 2 weeks? Are there holidays? Are there company events that would eat up this time? We try to get a clear picture of how much time are they actually going to have to commit to this. The next one, this is a big one. It needs to be something they have control over. I've seen a lot of accountability items that depend heavily on another person. And maybe that person ends up being busy or out. And then my report isn't able to complete their accountability item. So a lot of times I will ask them to reframe their accountability item. You know, instead of doing the pair programming with this person, instead of having that sit down with this leader, maybe the accountability item should just be get it on the calendar. You know, you have full control over that, and the end result should still be the same. It needs to be measurable. You need to be able to come back and easily say either yes, you did, or no, you did not complete this item. You know, a lot of times my reports will have some bigger side project or maybe like a presentation that they're working on. They know they want to work on it, but they also know they can't finish it before our next meeting. And so I will tell them, you know, you either need to come up with a definitive chunk that you think you can finish, or just time box it. Say you'll spend an hour on it. It's easy to come back and say either yes, you did, or no, you did not spend that hour, regardless of the progress you made. And the last one, it needs to be something that triggers growth. This one should be pretty obvious because the entire goal of this accountability item is to get them growing. You know, filling out a form for HR for open enrollment benefits is not a very good accountability item. Fortunately, my reports have all been pretty good at just kind of naturally gravitating toward items that get them toward their larger goals. So even with all those guidelines, it can still be a challenge to come up with a good accountability item. So then I've got a few go-to questions that I use to really get their gears spinning. The first one, do you have any concerns about upcoming work for your squad? You know, this is an area where my reports are very good at recognizing concerning things. You know, maybe there's an upcoming technical challenge and they're not sure their squad is equipped to handle it. Or maybe they've got a situation where they've got like 4 devs all working on different things and they're just worried about how it's all going to come together in the end. They're good at recognizing it, but they may not always feel like they're in a position to do something about it. Or maybe they're just assuming that somebody else is. And this is a good opportunity to encourage them to step up and make sure that their concerns get addressed, either through their own actions or by sparking some good conversations with their teammates. Another question, is there anything that would have been helpful to have learned the past couple months, or is there anything you can think of that would be helpful to learn for the next couple months? This is a good opportunity to find any topics that they could dive deep on that could really help out their team. And then the next one, is there anything you've done recently or anything you've learned recently that would be worthwhile to share with a wider audience? At Huddle, we have this really great culture around knowledge sharing, but I found that a lot of times people don't think about the opportunities to share things, or they might think that certain topics aren't worthwhile to share. So this is another great opportunity to find things there. Sometimes you really just have to think outside the box. My favorite accountability item of all time so far, a report came in, they said that their squad's morale was kind of low because they'd been in a crunch time for a while now. They had this big deadline looming. So at first I asked, is there anything that you could do to go above and beyond to better the chances of success for your squad to hit this deadline? And they said, honestly, no. We've got a really great plan in place and everybody's got a lot of confidence in that. I don't think there's anything more I can do there. So then I said, well, what about the squad morale? Is there anything you think you could do there? And they thought about it for a minute and they said, that's a pretty good idea. They ended up bringing in a cake for their squad. That was their accountability item, was to bring something in to boost squad morale. And you might be wondering, how is bringing in a cake helping anybody to grow professionally? Well, for this individual, they had a pretty big focus on finding more ways to bring value to their squad. And taking a little bit of interest, a little bit of ownership in the morale of your squad, that can be a big deal. And it shows up later on when their teammates are giving feedback like, hey, this person really cares about our team. Here are some examples of that. Now, my reports have written a lot about this accountability item since I started doing it. It's very popular in my feedback. So I got a few of these I'm going to cycle through as I talk about this one last very important note. It is very often that I make a suggestion about what their accountability item could be. I fully recognize the power dynamic of a supervisor making a suggestion to their report. And I understand the pressure that a report might feel to agree to something that their supervisor has suggested. Now, I really, really want every accountability item to be something that they are comfortable with and fully bought into. So every time I do make a suggestion, I will ask, is this something you would want to do? Is this something you'd be excited to do? I also try to come up with multiple suggestions just so they have some options. As it turns out, my reports take these things very seriously, much more seriously than I thought they would, because again, there are no real consequences to failing to do these things. But I've actually had a report come in and tell me that their happiness index number was lower because they missed their accountability item. And that made me very conflicted. I've also had reports come in a little bummed out, and they say, I missed my item. I started it, but then I realized that it wasn't really applicable, so I didn't do it. But I spent a little time on this other thing instead, but still, that thing I said I was going to do, I missed it. And I say, hold up. Are you telling me that you pivoted from one accountability item to another? Like you recognized that it wasn't going to be worthwhile, but instead of going back to your normal routine, you found a different professional growth item and you did that instead? That's awesome. I wouldn't count that as a miss at all. Remember, my goal here is just to get them in the habit of doing something a little extra in between each one-on-one. And in this scenario, they've done that. All right, that's number 2, the accountability item. Number 3, now on the surface, this one may not seem as valuable as the other 2, but let me tell you this. When I surveyed my reports about what aspects of our one-on-ones they found to be most valuable or enjoyable, this one had the highest marks. And to be honest, this is the part of my one-on-ones that I look forward to the most. Third item is the fun question. You can tell I worked really hard on these names. So what is the fun question? Once again, I got to start off by explaining the problem that I saw, which basically boils down to, I am bad at small talk. I can give off some pretty awkward first impressions when I can't think of anything interesting to say or ask. I can only talk about the weather so much. And I'm not afraid to sit in silence. It can take me a while to really get to know somebody because of this. If you need any more proof, come find me later and I can show you. But this deficiency of mine, I felt like it was preventing me from getting more personable with my reports, from building better rapport. You see, I don't work on the same team as my reports. We don't get a lot of opportunity outside of our one-on-ones for just general better getting to know each other. On top of that, in my one-on-ones, I kept adding more structure to it. That time was filling up with all these work and professional growth related topics. There wasn't time for small talk. And I felt like I wasn't getting to know my reports well enough, and they weren't getting to know me well enough. And I thought if I could fix that, I can start building even better relationships for trust and honesty. So I decided to just go ahead and add small talk to the structure of my one-on-ones. Of everything that I have experimented with, this felt the most experimental. So I went into my one-on-one and I said, hey, at the end of this meeting, I'm going to ask you a question. And I don't want you to answer it today. I want you to think about it for 2 weeks. And then at our next meeting, we're both going to answer it. The first question that I asked was this one. If you got all your afternoons off, but your pay remained the same, what new hobby would you pick up? It's pretty straightforward. Nothing too daunting there. But with this question, I learned something new about every one of my reports. And they all learned something new about me. And that felt really good. Now, if I were better at small talk, I probably could have found a more natural way to just work this into the conversation. But honestly, doing it like this, it wasn't that awkward. Now, this question is essentially an icebreaker question. Most all of my fun questions are. You see, I scoured the internet looking for icebreakers and just general better getting to know each other questions. And I started to compile a list of the ones that I thought could work really well for this. I also started to just come up with questions on my own. And now I'm constantly trying to think up good questions for this. And I've come prepared to share. So here's my list of well-refined questions. Now there's actually 3 pages here, so I'm going to slowly cycle through them as I keep talking about it. I'll also make them available somewhere. Now, with these questions, I do bi-weekly one-on-ones, so there's about a year's worth of material here, a little bit more. Some of these questions do spark better conversations than others, but honestly, there's no real duds in here. Every one of them, I've learned something new about my reports. They learn new things about me. It continues to feel like we are building better rapport. Another thing to note, I think phrasing matters quite a bit. One of the things I noticed early on was that sometimes my reports would get stuck on this idea of how is he thinking of this question? If I come up with a serious answer, is he going to come up with a joke answer and it's going to be kind of awkward? So now, when I give a question, I will explain how I'm thinking of it. I don't give them my answer, but I try to explain the path that I'm going to go with it because I don't want them to get stuck on that. All these questions can effectively be asked a dozen different ways, but I try to give them a starting place and a direction to make it as easy as possible for them to come up with something. I'm not really worried about limiting the scope of the question. I just want us to have something to talk about. Another thing to note about these questions, they are not ordered entirely randomly. As you go down the list, you will run into a few of them that seem a little more personal than the others. So about that, the past few years, the managers at Huddle, we have been collectively trying to get better at our craft. And one of the things we talked about a lot this past year was vulnerability. There's this really great TED Talk by Brené Brown called The Power of Vulnerability. If you've never seen it, I highly recommend it. In it, she talks about the importance of vulnerability in creating meaningful relationships. And meaningful relationships are key to keeping your employees engaged. So the managers at Huddle, we watched this, we talked about it, and one of the themes that came up afterward was, how do you even find opportunities to display vulnerability to your reports? And there were some decent answers in there, but I started to think, well, maybe this fun question is a good opportunity for it. So I started to work in a few questions that were just a little more personal than the others, specifically to display vulnerability, to get a little real with my reports. The first question that I thought really fit the bill there was, what's one way you hope to be different than your parents? Now think about this question for a second, and you'll probably realize that I'm essentially asking you to tell me something that you view as a flaw or failure with your parents. It's probably not something you should ask a brand new report. You might also be thinking, that doesn't sound like a very fun question. You wouldn't be wrong, but there's a flip side. You think about personal goals, ways you want to be better than your parents, and then you're going to share that with somebody who's also going out on a line to share theirs. And that feels great. Honestly, I think it would be tough not to create a stronger bond with somebody talking through things like this. As you go down that list of questions, we're going to talk about our own flaws, our mistakes, times we've been wrong. But I always try to mix those in between some of these more fun and genuinely lighthearted questions. So now I've got a little bit of time to burn, so I'm going to share with you all my favorite fun question, which is this one that I came up with. If you could define the events for a pentathlon, and it doesn't have to be athletic, what events would you choose that would give you the best chance of winning overall? So the idea here is you don't have to be the best at any one of these events, but you think you'd be the only person that could do well at all 5, and so you'd win overall. And the interesting thing here is you have to think about a variety of skills or knowledge that you have. You don't want a lot of overlap between your events. And I found that you can learn some very fun and interesting tidbits about people with this question. And you're all about to learn something interesting about me, because here is my pentathlon. My first event is ping pong. We play an awful lot of ping pong at Huddle, but it's okay, we don't advertise it. My second event is Smash Brothers, the video game, but not the newest version of the game, and not the second newest version of the game, but actually a mod of that one that makes it more like the previous one. You can get as specific as you need to with these events. Third event, music interval identification. There's probably a better name for this, but like if I hear 2 notes and say, oh, that's a minor third or a perfect fifth, just seemed like an obscure thing. My fourth event, Rubik's Cube solving. Not because I'm particularly fast at it. I'm really banking on the assumption that most people never bothered to learn how to solve a Rubik's Cube. And then my last event is hula hoop. And now this is something that I didn't even know that I was good at until a few years ago when we had a competition at Huddle, and I somehow managed to take first place by going 44 minutes straight with a hula hoop. Yeah. So there's my pentathlon. Now there's not a whole lot much more to say about the fun question other than why? Why is it important? What's it for? Why bother with something that's not directly tied to professional growth? Well, for me, ultimately, it boils down to retention. Now, I'm not trying to suggest that asking your employees fun questions will make them magically stick around longer. To understand this, I got to go back to my timeline. If you recall, I had these 2 jobs right after college, and I left each one in about a year. And I left because of various frustrations. But when you think about it, the reason I left so early is because it was easier to find a new job than to talk to my boss about my frustrations. Now let me say that again and this time really try to soak in the absurdity of this statement. It was easier to find a new job than to talk to my boss about my frustrations. And you know the saddest part? It's not that uncommon of a situation. I've heard similar stories from many others. Some of you might be able to relate to that. I don't want that for my reports. I want them to feel comfortable bringing these things to me, talking to me about anything. But I can't just say, hey, you should feel comfortable talking to me. It doesn't work that way. It requires a relationship built over time based on trust and honesty. So all of this is just a piece of trying to build that better relationship. So there you have it. Those are my 3 tools for better one-on-ones. They're not complicated. I don't think any of them are particularly novel. A really great manager is probably effective in these areas already. But if you're like me and you think there's room for improvement, then maybe there's something in here that can help you too. Now, if any of you are interested in implementing any of these things, if you have any questions, find me. Find me on Twitter, hit me up. I'm more than happy to chat about it. If you do try anything out, I would love to hear how it goes. Also, I'm running low on fun questions, so if any of you have some good ones, please forward them my way. And last but not least, when you think of your own pentathlon, send that my way too. I would love to hear it. Thanks for listening. There's actually like 3 minutes left if anybody does have a question now.
So I have a question about the last thing that you touched on, which is that you left all of these other places because your manager didn't put as much effort into allowing you to provide feedback. So this is kind of like off topic from your whole talk, but how could you encourage your manager to do those things? Or is that a thing you could do?
It's, so actually, interesting you say that. If I go back to my timeline, there's that third job where I was there for 6 years. Starting out, I still didn't have that great relationship. I mean, it was a little bit better, but still not great. But I felt bad about the first 2 jobs, and so I promised to myself that I would talk to my boss before leaving. And that was scary. And I wouldn't expect any report to feel like they have to do that. I mean, it worked out okay for me because I just said there was a point where I literally said, hey, I'm thinking about leaving because I'm kind of frustrated about some things. And it worked out really well. But yeah, that's tough. For people that are in that position, I mean, you can try to open up more and just hope that it goes okay. But I don't know. Sorry, I don't have much better answer beyond that.
Hi. I saw some really detailed feedback. Maybe you already covered this, but how did you get feedback on this one-on-one feedback process? Does it have its own 3 rules or whatever?
So I did a few different things. One was there's a point, like after I'd been doing a bunch of experimentations with our one-on-ones, I sent out surveys just to try to figure out, what pieces of this were working, what wasn't working. So I got some feedback there. All the feedback that I showed, though, was actually just part of upwards feedback that Huddle does. I think it's about every quarter now, there's just a big set of questions that we ask everybody about their manager. And so it's just feedback that flows upwards.